Welcome to Recross the Paths, compact cube conversations with designers and curators. My guest today is a new connection for me. This is Nick. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, and thanks for having me, Cade.
Well, it's a treat to have you here. Today, we're going to talk together about a desert cube, in particular, your desert rose.
Yeah, it's something I've been working on for a while, and I'm excited to get to share it with more people.
To get us started, could you give us the elevator pitch for the desert rose?
Sure thing. It is a drafter basics environment, so there's where the desert comes in, and it is designed for 2 to 4 players. I do have a variant to accommodate a fifth as well. It is a thematic environment, drawing heavy inspiration from sets like the Brothers' War and Antiquities. So, as you can imagine, a lot of artifact stuff going on. I also am a big fan of lands, so land synergies are represented as well. I have a special rule, so each player does get access to a set of Urzatron lands, so Urza's power plant, mine, and tower. And my themes include recycling, history, war, climate change, and resource extraction.
So we're covering a lot of ground that's not usually in an overview, right? Uh, let's start with the Urza lands. Was that something that started with the initial draft of the cube, or is that something that got added in over time?
It was definitely in the first draft. My early goal was to use cards that I had kicking around in my collection that I wasn't playing really. And I had a set of the Antiquities Urza lands with all the different arts. And I was thinking, like, how do I play with these in a draft environment without breaking it? I didn't really feel like balancing that. I didn't know how to balance it. So I figured if I just did a special rule that I would be able to give players access to it without necessarily taking up like slot equity in the actual list, as well as balancing issues. And also, it kind of felt like a little help for people who are unused to drafting their basics to have a couple extra lands that they could just use.
Sure. So it not only solves like making sure that everybody gets enough lands, but also helps the feel bad of drafting Urza's tower and not getting the other pieces or something.
Right, exactly. And then because I'm going for a thematic kind of vibe here, it made a lot of sense to use cards that actually referenced Urza and Mishra. So slam dunk there.
How often do the Urza lands get played, you find, in drafts?
So I think they used to get played more before Outlaws of Thunder Junction was released. I had 20 like colored land sources that tap for two or more colors, or 25 abouts, and then each color had its like 6 or 7 lands that tap for just that color. So color sources were really, really limited, and it seemed like more people were playing the Urza lands. Now with the extra 10 desert duels, they haven't shown up quite as much. But again, sometimes you don't get enough lands in a draft, or you just kind of miss out on a few. So having those as just a kind of backup is usually kind of where it seems to pop in. That said, though, there are a handful of 7 drop cards like Mere Battlesphere and stuff. So there are decks that can take advantage of them, and there's ways to find them too.
So, starting with those lands in mind, was desert also part of the original conception?
It was part of it pretty early on. I don't remember if it was like an immediate thought or if it was like after like a day or two of thinking about it, but it was definitely early on. Uh, the cube's inception coincided with the release of the Brothers' War, so there's like not a desert thematic there, but there are mechanics stuff there, but there is desert thematic stuff there. A lot of like sandy art and unearthing treasures as kind of the main mechanic, or one of the main mechanics. So pretty early on.
So, did the desert flavor come over time, or is that just something that we think of mostly as a land restriction more than a thematic one?
No, it was a thematic and mechanic restriction almost out of the gate. If it wasn't like the first thing I thought of, it was maybe like the fifth thing I thought of.
So, do you find it easier or more challenging to design within both thematic and mechanical restriction like that?
So I thought it was kind of easier in a kind of counterintuitive way, because I'm focusing on this like heavy aesthetic and thematic goal. My options for cards are pretty limited, And similarly speaking, mechanically at the time, deserts were pretty limited as well. So that smaller card pool, and then again, kind of trying to pull from cards I had but wasn't necessarily playing. That kind of restriction really helped me focus my early vision and helped me ultimately realize what my longer term vision was. So counterintuitively, it's been kind of helpful to give myself that restriction.
I love your overview for this cube. The page is beautiful. You've done a really nice job laying everything out here. And I really appreciate your emphasis on storytelling in particular. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So this is kind of related to me being school a couple months ago. I wanted to give this cube a little bit of a narrative because it was so thematically inspired. Uh, and I was in a couple composition classes at the time. So by doing a little bit of creative writing for the overview, I was able to get a little bit of practice in for school while also engaging in my hobby, which for like my work life balance was really important. Uh, Obviously, I lift a lot from the Brothers' War and Antiquities, but I did want to give it a little bit of my own spin. So there's stuff from throughout the multiverse, stuff from like Mirrodin, Kamigawa, because like Neon Dynasty has a lot of different artifact stuff going on. And then, of course, we got Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So it's not quite so limited to that. And I wanted to kind of like build my own world in a manner of speaking, color just outside of the lines.
Yeah. So do you think of it as like a concrete plane in a sense, or is it more like just uh, putting ideas together?
I would say probably more just putting ideas together. It's not really a concrete plane. Like I don't have a name for the place they're at. So as far as I'm concerned, they're still primarily on Dominaria. Uh, there's a lot of uh, named places like Caves of Koilos that are represented in the cube. So it's kind of tied into that. But we are planeswalkers, and things do end up where they don't always start. So.
Have you found that players have responded well to the this flavorful prompt, which I love, was like to mix and match your cards during the draft, like trying to make these themes work?
Yeah, I think I've noticed some stuff that I never would have put together. So hopefully I'm on the right track. I've tried pretty hard to layer synergies so that different decks might want the same card for different reasons, whether it's just taking advantage of all the different types represented on the card or things like that. So, like a great example would be hard evidence. It's a sorcery, but it makes a token and it also makes an artifact. So, little things like that. I look for cards that I can take advantage of in that way. Also, because it's a 260 and it's designed for usually about 4 players, there's around 52 cards that aren't seen in a normal draft. So sometimes you're just not going to see the things that you're expecting to find, which I think kind of plays into the thematic elements of the cube, where it's like you might want something, but that doesn't mean that you can have it. So that said, I do also think though that individual card quality is a little higher now, just because some of the sets recently have helped out, but we'll see.
Yeah, I was going to ask in regards to card quality, how do you find combining some of the old flavorful cards from literal antiquities to, setting those alongside modern cards? Do you find that there's a tension there with power level?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really tough. Like I said, this was a play cards I have kind of cube, and included in that was like Sarah Angel and Shivan Dragon, right? So it's like there's certain cards that don't necessarily hold up to the playing many roles cards, and they're they're a little bit hard to consider for cuts when I am looking at the new stuff. Um, but then again, it's like you got cards like Ornithopter, which has been a pretty important role player in the game's history in all sorts of different environments and manners. So I do think that there's always the temptation to push power a little bit more than theme, but I try to keep it in check. There's definitely a couple cards that I've had to pass on, even though they would be slam dunks.
Do you feel like you do that on an individual card by card basis, or do you have to evaluate the whole cube at once? Or sorry, do you choose to evaluate the whole cube at once as you do that?
I really try to be holistic, but that said, I'm almost always willing to try something and reassess it after the fact. So, like, it's a little easier to consider it on a one by one basis. I try to think of it as a more holistic approach when I'm doing a big update. But if there's just like a card or two that I'm like kind of thinking about, that's usually a little bit easier to kind of just think about it quickly as an individual thing, toss it in, try it out.
I mean, I will note that sometimes your cards like Shivan Dragon or Sarah Angel, their role is just to end games,
Yeah,
so
no, absolutely. And to help accommodate drafters who are not uh, as used to thinking about every aspect of a card, just having certain things that are just like, yeah, this is probably good, is kind of a nice like a complexity consideration. Don't want to make people read too much. Familiarity is pretty helpful.
sure. Speaking of building towards your drafters, you noted this is for 2 to 4 players. Do you have a consistent play group that you would engage with this cube, or is this just kind of a small package by design?
Yeah, this is kind of a thing that was born out of necessity. I live in a pretty rural area, so it's hard to get people together. And in addition to that, I was in school for a long time, so with that, it was like even harder. I have an EDH group that we play with, so this was like a way for them to try something other than EDH. And then it was also just a way for my wife and I to play cards on weeknights a little bit quicker than other options.
Well, that's always nice when you can involve family in pursuits like this too. What did you find most challenging about working on a small form environment as opposed to a more traditional, like 360 plus card cube?
Oh, it is so challenging to make those slots work. Uh, I think my initial list for this cube started at 220, and I just kept adding cards. I just kept adding cards. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, I absolutely cannot go beyond this number because it'll just be too cumbersome for a two-player draft. We just won't see enough of what we need to see, or things won't be able to come together right. So it was really hard. But fortunately, my prior cube project was another small cube. And, like I said, you try to layer synergies and take advantage of all the different aspects of a card, and that does help a lot. And more recent draft sets have really kind of leaned into that philosophy. So I feel like we get more and more toys all the time.
And with cards doing more and more, it seems in each set, you get a couple more cards probably that fit into a couple different roles that hopefully don't break the power band.
Oh yeah, hopefully. But I'm always willing to take a risk and fix it later. So
For personal curiosity, what's your favorite two-player draft format?
we've been doing houseman drafts. So you have like a face-up draft. You got 9 cards in the middle, and then each player has 5 in their hand, and you're just swapping cards from your hand into the uh, open information in the middle. I find that it's a good way to see a large portion of the cube when you just have 2 players. We see about 2/3 of it, which is pretty good. And then there's a fun dynamic of having an idea of what your opponent might be doing, but not having the full picture. So I've been enjoying that.
There is a real value of the hidden information and like having a cube that allows for that flex that you can't guarantee that people are going to get each thing. How do you like to scale up from 2 to 4 then?
For 4 players, we do 4 packs of 13. Let me make sure I'm doing my math right there. Yeah, so that's a 52 card pool, 4 packs of 13. You get about 3 picks out of every pack. So you get a second wheel. It gives you a little bit better of an idea of like what is wheeling in the table, I guess. Helps give a little bit more context to the draft. It's really hard to look at, I don't know, like an 11 card pack or an 8 card pack when 6 of them might be lands and have an idea of what you might want to be doing. So I found that 13 and 4 packs of those has been a pretty good number for us.
To revisit a little bit of some what you were saying earlier about storytelling and having this be thematic, does it feel like something that as players put decks together that there is a bit of the I don't know how to call it, like a role playing element of just like, hey, this is the sort of thing I'm aiming to create, or is it something that's kind of just expressed through the mechanics, and every now and again we'll follow those breadcrumbs?
I'm really trying to and hoping that it's a little bit of both. Like for me, there's kind of different archetypes you can inhabit when you're visiting the Desert Rose. Like you could be an archaeologist or you could be a nomad. There's different kind of things, and if you find yourself in that archetype, you can kind of build a little bit. You might dip into other ones, but I definitely try to give a little bit of that kind of role playing feel to it. And then absolutely, I'm trying to accomplish that mechanically. So like Unearth is a pretty important mechanic in the cube. I always am looking at new Unearth cards. Things like Madness are really important. Kind of you're lost in the sands and you're not sure what's real and what's not. So things like that I try to kind of lean into. So hopefully both, I guess, is my answer.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like with Graveyard being a critical part of that story too, since you are digging things up, they have to be somehow underground.
Yeah, in a manner of speaking. And I guess also that ties into, like I mentioned, recycling earlier.
Hmm.
The graveyard is a really big component of games, I would say. They always seem to be a little bit important in some way or another.
So you mentioned earlier, along with these themes of like how it's expressed mechanically, you also mentioned a couple things that I don't normally hear in overviews. You're talking about themes or expressions about war or climate change. How do you get to ideas like that, or is that something you think about outside of the game and outside of design, and then it just comes out in what you're building?
So I absolutely think about these things outside of design. They're constantly on my mind, if I'm being honest. I view the world as a whole. I'm never trying to look at something without the full context. So there's a reason I ended up putting those into the cube. Um, as far as like how that ended up happening, uh, I mean, Timeless Lotus is kind of the initial uh, seed, if you will. I had just gone to the pre-release for Brothers War. I had the pre-release promo of it. I'm just appreciating the art, and it's a lotus growing out of a destroyed robot, right? And it's like you can see the mold and the moss on the robot, and it was just making me think about like how nature kind of reclaims itself in the absence of other interference, right? And other cards kind of played into that. Things like Fade to History, and you know, the flavor text on the fifth edition version of Felwar Stone. Throw
Mm.
those who throw stones throw away the world, right? So there's like this idea of if you're looking to have a conflict, if you're looking to have war, like you're going to lose everything as a result, right? So it's flavor text, it's art, it's the things I think about all the time in my daily life. It's just kind of a coalescence of a lot of different things, I suppose.
I really like that. I think many people would approach a game like this as escapism, but I think there's something really special about being able to take this and turn it into a vehicle for just chewing on that in a different way. So not ignoring it, but also not glorifying it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely one of my goals, I would say. And hopefully it kind of shines through either if you're just looking at the cards as a whole or if you're actually thinking about the ludo narrative of the gameplay, I suppose.
I also appreciate the aesthetics that you've chosen to pursue here. I know there are a lot of old border cards, there are a lot of things from, as you said, from your collection in days past, but then I also the specificity of choosing things with particular arts or particular flavor texts that speak to the message you're trying to share.
Yeah, you have no idea some of the Scryfall searching I've done. It's like why did I land on the fifth edition copy of Stinkin' Fellwar Stone? Right? It's like I could I could play a black border version, which would look a little bit sharper, but all the black border versions don't have that line of flavor text, which I just absolutely needed as far as I was concerned. So I appreciate that it's not going unnoticed.
Well, and it's those little kernels that it's not every player is going to stop and go, "Oh, look at this really thoughtful flavor text." But for those that do connect, it's something really special.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Richard Garfield interview on Lucky Paper Radio from a recent episode, where he talked about like how to tell the story because they were trying to tell the story in antiquities for the first time, and that really resonated with me. That's like why I kind of fell in love with the game as a kid, reading flavor text and looking at art, and then using my imagination to fill in the gaps. So that kind of inspiration is definitely uh, part of my design ethos here as well.
So, thinking about this process holistically, what have you found most surprising about the design process for Desert Rose?
Whew, yeah, so I was really surprised at how positively people have reacted to this project. Like I said, it just started out as a way for me to play cards with my wife and a couple friends. It wasn't really about anything other than that. So, developing the overview, finding my aesthetic goals, and realizing them, these kind of things were just done for myself. So, when I've had awesome cubers play and be excited about this cube and being supportive of me for it, it's like really incredible. It's kind of hard to put into words. I didn't really expect that, you know. It is a small cube. It's not like it's got the same appeal as a lot of, 432s and 360s, 540s, whatever. But I do think that that is partially due to the shifting landscape of people's perception of what cube can be. So I'm super excited to get to share this niche with so many awesome people.
Yeah, and I would challenge that it's not even a lack of appeal. Sometimes it's just something fresh and new that people don't know that they enjoy yet. I think Desert Cube has been picking up on a lot of popularity recently, and I think you're in a prime spot for a lot more people to really enjoy that.
Yeah, great point. I've been loving desert drafts, that's for sure.
As you were considering how to use lands in Desert Rose, did you have a model in mind or another cube that you were basing this on, or were these original ideas that you wanted to pursue?
So I did not look at other lists as far as deserts were concerned. I had kind of an idea. I was using math to kind of figure out and reverse engineer about how many lands I wanted. So my first couple iterations kind of had some fluctuations in that count. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I do remember after a month or two of working on the project, Chill MCG reached out to me and was like, "Oh, I noticed that you landed on the same percentage of lands in yours that I did in my Dragons of Winter Night cube. So that's really reassuring to me, or you should be reassured." I don't remember what he exactly
That's
said,
amazing. That's so
but
cool.
we kind of just like came to the same conclusions, right? And I thought that was really neat. Um, so I probably should have did a little bit more research ahead of it, but I suppose I landed in a pretty reasonable spot, fortunately.
And it sounds like with a smaller environment, you have opportunity to test more frequently, or that you get a chance to see what feels good or what needs to be changed.
Yeah, I would say that that's kind of true. You see a greater portion of the cards a lot of times, and yeah, just like being able to get two or four people together is a lot easier than six or eight. So definitely was able to get some quick early iterations in, which is really nice.
We've gone a lot of different directions from the specifics of how you're approaching things mechanically to thematically. What advice would you offer to other designers who are working on projects in a similar vein?
Yeah, this is a bit of a hard question because I feel like I'm kind of new to this myself. This is the longest project I've personally maintained, so I'm still learning and still iterating. But that said, I do think that if you're designing in the desert space, I would start with your lands and what you want them to accomplish, and then building out from there. So for me, I knew early on that I wanted colored sources of mana to have some kind of cost associated with them. So if they tap for two colors, it enters tapped or it costs life, right? If it comes in untapped and it taps for a color, it's going to deal damage to you, with the exception of like basics, and this makes basics look a little bit more appealing, right? So that's where I started, and I would suggest other desert designers to start there as well. For people who are doing small environments, my advice would be to not be afraid to go over what is like considered the norm. So like if you're doing a regular tuber, you might do like 180. If you're doing a small desert cube, you might start at 216. I think that it's worth it to push that number up a little bit, especially early on. Just a couple extra cards can help you flesh out your mechanics, your themes, add some variance, which might be nice depending on how often you're playing. And I don't think that it dilutes the core idea too much or makes the draft too difficult or anything like that. So try going a little bit higher than you might think.
So are you working on any other projects that you're taking things you've learned from Desert Rose and applying them forward?
Yeah, kind of. I have been toying with the idea of expanding Desert Rose to accommodate 8 players. Um, Good timing because I know Uber Bear, they just kind of expanded their Monopoly small cube to do a larger thing. So some good ideas I was able to kind of learn from that, which was nice. So that's something I've been kind of passively working on. It's not a priority by any means. And then the other one I've been working on, I have a 360 cards I own cube that just was bits and pieces of old decks from Kitchen Table or EDH or previous cube projects I'd worked on. And that I have not had a chance to actually do a draft with yet, so that's been sitting on the back burner as well. So got a couple projects, but nothing is first and foremost. Really just maintaining Desert Rose, and with the OTJ and the MH3 update, it's feeling like it's in a pretty nice spot right now, and I'm hoping that I don't have to do too many big more updates in the near future because I want to get a chance to get a feel for these new cards before I change anything up too drastically.
And I appreciate that you noted that recycling was a theme in Desert Rose as a cube, but you've already mentioned a couple times using the things you already have to build these cubes too. It sounds like you're not doing a whole lot to go out of your way to acquire a bunch of new things, but that it's more, taking what's already extant.
I mean, it definitely started that way, but I can't be too easy on myself. I have spent some money on this thing, and
Well,
part of that is to achieve certain aesthetic goals. So I've spent some money, but I do try to use what I have. That's the reason why we have all these cards, right? Because we like playing with them. So try to actually play them.
by way of wrap up, if you could have any card printed as a judge promo, what card would it be, and who would you have do the illustration?
Yeah,
Thinking
so I'm
about
gonna
aesthetics, of course, like you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go back to a card I mentioned earlier, which is Hard Evidence. This is kind of a more recent pet card of mine. Uh, and part of the reason for this choice is I just lost to the crab token that was made on turn one a couple days ago. And it was just beating me down with equipment. And it was like I was in this game I just played called Another Crab's Treasure, where you're crab with a sword fighting things, right? So here I
Yeah,
am.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just beat that game as a crab, and then now I'm losing a game to a crab. So that just really cracked me up, and it's just a card I kind of like. So I would probably say Hard Evidence. And as far as who would illustrate it, I would like to see Drew Tucker do that. I really like his dreamy style, and it would be a really sweet piece to have, I think.
Oh man, Drew Tucker is one of my personal favorites, and having just seen a lot of material recently on Another Crab's Treasure, that feels like a perfect crossover.
Yeah, yeah.
Which equipment were you getting beaten down with, by the way?
Oh, let's see.
Was it Bone Splitter?
It was Bone Saw and Bone Splitter, or no, it was Bone Saw and Transmogrant's Crown. So yeah,
Oh, well,
uh,
sometimes the O3 gets there.
sure does.
Well, Nick, this has been an absolute pleasure. If people want to learn more about the Desert Rose or perhaps other projects you're working on, where would be the best place to point them?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I would say if you want to keep in touch with me, I'm fairly active on Twitter at JFK underscore 420. There's a goofy story to go with that, but that's for another time. And then if you want to check out any of the cubes that I have working on over on Cube Cobra, my username is Strogie. That is Strogie. And yeah, you can check out Desert Rose and a couple other little projects that I have on there.
And as we were talking about aesthetics earlier, you have a lot of the versions linked, and it really is an amazing experience to go through the overview and the list for Desert Rose and for the other things you're working on. Hopefully, we'll have other chances to connect in the future. And again, I really appreciate you taking your time to chat through something special.
Yeah, absolutely. Cade, thank you so much for having me on. I look forward to keeping in touch, and thanks again.